Welcome to another episode of Outside Ourselves. I am your host, Kelsi Combera. Today I am talking with my good friend, Katie Koplin. Katie is the co-host of another 1517 podcast, Freely Given. She co-hosts that show with our friend Gretchen Ronovic. You may recognize Katie. She was on the show at the end of last year for a special Advent podcast with Gretchen. Today I'm so excited to talk with Katie about her new project, which is a devotional written for moms by moms. The devotional is called Encouragement for Motherhood, and it is out now through 1517 Publishing. Katie fills us in on why she wanted to write this devotional, how we both think it's a little bit different than your typical mom's devotional, and why it's so important and so essential, just as it is in any vocation or any stage of life, for moms to be rooted in the forgiveness offered through Christ's work on the cross, and why that forgiveness can free us to serve our children in our vocation as mothers. Serve them with joy and serve them with a certain level of assurance and certainty that God is not only for us, but He is for them. I think you'll be able to tell, if you don't know Katie, that this is something that just kind of pours out of her. She's able to laugh at herself and to make jokes and take herself lightly when it comes to the topic of motherhood because of this, because of the freedom that is offered to her in Christ, the freedom that is hers in Christ. I usually say this at the end of our shows, but I'm going to put it up front for those who might end the show after our guest leaves. If you have not done so already and you enjoy Outside Ourselves content, would you please go to Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to podcasts and give the show a 5-star rating? You could also do a quick written review. That would be super helpful as well. Those are just some really easy and quick ways, even if you are watching on YouTube, for other people to find the show. And then, of course, if you are watching on YouTube, I'd love if you could subscribe to this channel. That way you won't miss any content in the future. I know you're going to enjoy this conversation. So here is today's episode. Katie, welcome back to Outside Ourselves. It's really good to see you. Thank you for joining me this morning.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
You were here last year with Gretchen to talk about Advent, but today we are actually going to talk about this new book that you edited and you compiled, and you also wrote a lot for, called Encouragement for Motherhood. It's actually, the day we're filming this, I think tomorrow is the actual release day. This will come out in a couple of weeks, but still, I think in time for Mother's Day, if people want to order the book. So yes, that was a lot. Tell us a little bit, just a really quick intro to who you are, again, for those who maybe missed your Advent show, and then we'll get into talking about this book.
Yeah, sounds good. So I co-host the podcast Freely Given with Gretchen. I substitute teach a little bit. What else do I'm in grad school for mental health, do some writing, do some speaking, and we live in West central Minnesota, which I said I was never going to live, but here I am, loving it.
And that's where is that where you're from? Are you from?
No, well, I'm from Minnesota, but
yeah,
much closer to the Twin Cities. My husband's from this area, so I call it his hometown, and he's always like, "This isn't my home," but it's in the school district of his. So,
okay, yeah, and you are a mom yourself.
Oh yes, too. Yes, I do have kids. I have 4 of them.
And I wouldn't usually do this, but tell us their ages, kind of what stage you are in for motherhood, since that's what we're talking about today.
Well, that's a very appropriate part of the intro. I do love my children. So our oldest is 14, almost 15. So we're getting into he'll be able to drive soon, which is glorious and very scary. Our next one is our only girl, and she is 12. Then we have a 10-year-old boy and an 8-year-old boy. Those are my kids, and my daughter is especially featured in the devotional, which she has okayed. She's 12, so I thought I better check. But those are probably some of my favorites too. There's a Valentine story about her that I just love.
I just read that one. That one is so cute and so great. Like, what a great theological point that she's making in that story. That's amazing.
That part of her personality hasn't gone away, so it gets brought up a lot in conversations we have. So
yeah. Well, I want to get to some of the stories, probably specifically your stories in the devotional, because you did end up writing a lot for the book. But just tell us a little bit about why you wanted this book to exist and kind of the background behind putting it together.
Yeah. So it's not that there's no devotions out there for moms. The market's pretty saturated.
Yeah.
Also, Instagram's full, and we all have our ideas of what motherhood is, right? And the ideal mother, and where we should be getting our joy and our sense of meaning. But none of those things have been lasting for me, especially when it comes to my motherhood. Just like everything else in my life, the only thing that is lasting encouragement is the gospel. So that's really what this is a gospel-centered devotion. It just happens to be talking about motherhood.
Okay. And I would say, like you kind of mentioned, there's obviously a lot of devotionals out there for moms. A lot of information, a lot of resources nowadays, which is in a lot of ways good. Like, I'm glad there's more resources, and more, like, I would say more things that are really trying to equip women and mothers theologically. But I do think that this is like, because I know how you kind of put it together and the messaging that went into it. And then I've read some of it as well. I do think it's different. How would you say it's different than what the other stuff that you've seen out there?
Yeah, I think the very basic difference is that there's not a shed of how-to in it. Because it is so easy when we talk about motherhood in particular to go to the how-tos, or how we've done it even, and say this is the healthiest way to do it. And it also is not it doesn't encourage you through your own motivation. Does that make sense? Like, because I am not a great mother. Writing a motherhood book to me is not, no, this is dumb. But 15-17 came to me and said, hey, it would be great. You do this podcast. You should write something. And this is the idea that came to me. And part of it was I could pawn it off on other people. I could ask you to write, Gretchen to write, Melina Smith, Heidi Gaiman. And I think that collaborativeness of it helps it not be a how-to also, because all of us are different types of mothers, and we also live in different areas. I'm very Midwestern, Midwestern, as you can tell from my accent. But some of the writers live out on the East Coast, and I think that does give a flavor to how we mother, because it has to, because our context is different. But what can remain the same is where we find our hope. So.
Yeah. I was talking to, I think this was in my interview with Elise Fitzpatrick, and we were talking a little bit about how it's not that the law, and she said that she was like, the law stays the same. And obviously the gospel stays the same, but the way that we experience those, and I would say even specifically the law, like the way the law is going to find us and condemn us, is going to be very different. And that's not only true for your different vocation,
Mhm.
If you're a man and a father, or you're a single woman or whatever, that's going to be the difference. It's going to be that case for motherhood. And I think that's
Mhm.
why resources like this are important. But then, like you're saying, even within motherhood, that's really important to recognize, because different voices of motherhood are going to be able to reach different people. And if
Mhm.
we only have this like one ideal raised up, it's only ever going to come across as like completely condemning, because there's very few people that are going to meet whatever that ideal is.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I talk about is the ideal mom.
Yes, I love that one. You
When
want to talk a little bit
I
about that?
Yeah, when I was like when all my kids were really little, I did this thing and it's just atrocious, right? But I still do it to a certain degree today. I just catch myself faster. Um but I would try to turn myself into different types of moms. You know, because you
Mm-hmm.
have your crunchy moms, you have your moms that eat at McDonald's every other day, you have your moms who solely breastfeed, or you have your I don't even like these phrases like career mom or all of that stuff. But I noticed it and my kids would look at me like, you're nuts. Who are you today? Right? Depending on who we were at the playground with. And
Hmm.
it took me a long time to realize that I can still be friends with these moms who do things different than I do. And they can still be friends with me. And we still can learn from each other and exchange encouragement. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's important. There's a tension I've noticed for myself in this. Um, Definitely, I do that all the time. Like if I'm around like a gentle parenting mom, I'm all of a sudden like,
yep.
Otto,
I'm
I
like,
understand you're having big feelings right now. Like
yeah,
much more
because
patient than if we're at home.
yeah,
Much
I
more.
spend enough time on TikTok and Instagram. I can mimic it all. I can
Oh yeah.
mimic it all.
Absolutely. So yes, right there with you. And then you can feel also like I don't, for myself, like I know in moments where I'm around parents that are very different than me, or moms that are different, I can feel the condemnation, not necessarily from them
No.
sometimes, but it's not like they are saying anything specifically meant to make me feel bad. I just automatically feel insecure. And so then on the flip side too, I know for sure there are times like the other a week I was at a baby shower. I was talking to a really good friend who's about to have her baby this next month. We were talking about humidifiers, and all of a sudden, I'm like on this tangent about how I've gone. We went down a rabbit hole of finding the best humidifier, and we did find it, and it's great. And she was like looking at me, and she was like, "Well, what did you?" She was like asking me like, "What is the best humidifier?" And so I like gave her these three things, and then we kind of stopped talking about it, but I realized after, I was like, "Oh, she definitely already has a humidifier, like, on her
Mm-hmm.
registry," and it definitely didn't meet any of those things, and
Criteria.
I definitely condemned her in that moment, not
Yeah.
meaning to at all, like, I thought I was being helpful and, encouraging. How have you found the best ways to have relationships with parents that are different from you? A little bit of that story I told was to kind of show like sometimes we're not in complete control of this. Like we're not
Yeah.
trying to condemn other people, but at the same time, not feeling condemned for not being like other people, but also not feeling like you have to assert what is best for you or what you found to work for your family on to them. Because I think that's a hard place to live.
Mm-hmm. It's super hard, especially when you're opinionated. And I'm not super opinionated on a lot of things, but there are some things I'm like, man, that's a dumb way to do that. you know? And just because we've had a different way work for our family. So I guess the most simple way to say it is from a devotional that I read when my kids were all really little by Kim Crandall. And there's one line that just repeats in my head. And she said, we're all bad moms. That's why we need Jesus.
Hmm.
And I think in the midst of realizing that there's no perfect answer, but there are healthy answers, and
Mm-hmm.
the healthy answer might look different um, between what you have decided for your family and another family. And also, it's not, there's no perfect moms. We're all bad moms.
Yeah.
That's why we need Jesus. But we're all working towards serving our kids, right? And and I don't even want to use the word doing the best we can, because we don't do the best we can every day. I don't remember where I was, or I don't know if it was one of my grad school classes, but they said telling your kids to do their best over and over again is the worst thing you can tell them, because nobody can give their best all the time.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of peace in that, and a lot of, I don't really, I want to work at it. I want to be the best mom. And think about with Mother's Day coming up, what all the coffee mugs say: world's best mom, world's best grandma. Good moms get promoted to grandmas. So
yeah. There's I was gonna say, when we were talking about, or you were talking a little bit about, like, the difference in devotionals, and I think this kind of gets to what you're saying too. Like, I think what I see a lot in Christian resources in general, but I think it's really apparent in mom resources for moms, because of the limitations that a mom has, like time wise and everything like that, is the fact that, like, some resources, some devotionals for moms are more grace oriented, but they're still they're still putting it on you to seek that out. Like, they're still putting it on you to do the best you can to find grace. And that's, like, to me, that's like the difference between that and this devotional, or like what I think we would assert is important theologically. It's the difference between giving someone a treasure map and being like, go find the treasure. Like, the treasure's yours, but go find it. And just giving them the treasure. Like, just give it to them. Especially for moms who have no time, stop telling them to make time for devotionals or to do their best with the time they have and the interruptions that are going to come. Like, just actually give them the encouragement that they need, because you have got to assume that moms are tired and they're overwhelmed, and they have been the only script playing in their head is law, and what they need in that moment, like, let's just assume that. And so what they need in that moment is not more to do. They need the gospel. And I think you do that really well in this devotional. You're not giving people a treasure map. You're just giving them the treasure. So
I love that illustration. Are we giving them a treasure map or a treasure? That's fantastic. I was going to say too, as you were talking, you used the word limitation, and that was one of the things that rose to the surface of themes I saw as people submitted their contributions. When I asked people to write, I said, these are some examples, but I really want it to come from your experience from motherhood. I trusted all of these women that I know they're gospel centered. They're gonna hand over their goods. They're gonna give the treasure. That's gonna be the land. So I'm not gonna say you should write about breastfeeding, or there were some things that I knew they have thought about for a long time, and I said, hey, that would be great if you could write on this. But so often it came to limitations, whether it's there's one entry about mental health disorders and living with that, and the limitations we have as far as time with our kids. Those horrible posts about you only have 18 summers.
Yeah. I know them.
So, which make me so excited and cringe at the same time, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yes,
we are going to survive this, right? But also, no. But that's not factual. It's but then here's what the other thing I see so much in mom culture is, then I see the post that's like, well, if you're a good mom, you'll have more than 18 summers. They'll come back and visit you. talk about fear inducing.
Yeah.
So that is not the opposite, isn't an antidote, or putting the emphasis on my work is not the antidote to the exhaustion of motherhood. Giving women the completed work of Christ is the antidote. Now, does that mean you're going to sleep all night? No, sorry. I wish I could
Yeah.
say that. But does that mean your anxiety is going to go away? No. But in the
Yeah.
midst of all the hard, there's still hope. And
Yeah.
that's what that was my desire for this book.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me personally, there's there's absolutely nothing in my life that has taught me more about my limitations than motherhood. And as a perfectionist, that was very that I don't often recognize those limitations. Like I often take the condemnation of the law as a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And I do this in motherhood for sure all the time. But like it's just a literal reality of like, oh, there's only 24 hours in the day and I only have 2 hours to work,
Mm-hmm.
um or I only have 2 hours with my kids, you know? Um that makes you much more aware of how inadequate you are, which hopefully as Christians, like we don't want to leave people there. That's like you're saying, the point is to get people there, to get moms there so that they are turning towards who Christ is, not in an attempt to then make them better, but
No.
just the reality of who Christ is for them and who he will always be for them, no matter how many summers they have with their kids or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's it. So you kind of touched on it there. There's another part of mom culture that is like competitive over who's the worst.
Yes, exactly.
Like, oh, I haven't done laundry all week. My kids haven't had a bath in 2 weeks. Preach, sister. I'm there with you. But when I leave stuff like that, I'm not encouraged. I'm
Yeah.
just, sometimes it leads to a little bit of arrogance, like, oh, I don't have to do those things. Or,
Mm,
yeah, it's not that's not healthy either.
yeah,
Sharing those
because
things with one another is, I will say that, right? When you
mm,
are feeling down and realizing and having someone else look at you and say, yeah, me too. I've had that same, that is part of Christian community.
mm,
But when you get into that weird competition of who's worse, that's not healthy. It's not good. So
yeah. Have you found a way to balance that? Because I think that is so common for moms, for women, for people in general, but for moms and I think for women, it's easy to start being like, okay, we're competing for who's the worst. Great, like I'll win.
yep,
Now we're
yeah.
competing for who's the best. I'll win. How have you kind of figured out how to be vulnerable, and share in a way that does encourage without dragging each other down?
Mm-hmm. I don't, it depends on the person you're talking to, right? And at least we
Yeah.
have that ability when it's face to face, but on social media, we don't. And I think that's where
Mm,
I bring up social media, because that's where so much of mom interactions happen, is social media instead of face to face, because
mm,
of logistics. Like, people are working, they're on different schedules. We're not living in 1950 where mom stays home and you can go to a play date or whatever, or the kids are just running feral in the neighborhood. I mean, I live in West Central Minnesota, so we're close. We're close.
yeah.
But it's not exactly the same. I think it comes down to the being vulnerable, but also saying, yeah, but that's not great, right? So what are we left with? And reading the situation. And in secular places, it's harder to do
Yeah.
when you don't know where that person is. Because I don't want to come out and just be like, well, Jesus died for your sins, so everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Your laundry, it doesn't matter. And I hope that this book will be a jumping off place for those places and spaces where moms are getting together. So you can read one, talk about it, and then there's even a discussion question. So that's my little sales pitch for all the moms groups out there. But because it is a very difficult dynamic to navigate, because you don't want to look like the arrogant, well, you should do it this way, but you want the person to be seen and understood and know that you've been there too. Yeah. And it also is not always encouraging to hear, oh, you're going to miss this. So I think I don't have a perfect formulaic, like, this is what you should do, but just doing those things, like understanding that we need to hear, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And, but not letting go of the hope that we have, because that does influence our lives. And that's part of the reason I wanted to write this on motherhood, is because I think it does impact us differently when we can hear that the gospel is for us in these different avenues of our lives, right? In these different vocations that we hold. And like you said, I think motherhood is such an apt one because we are hit hard with our limitations.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what you're saying about trying to keep vulnerability to in-person spaces is very helpful. Which means sometimes, like, you're going to have to, if we're going to give people a to-do or whatever, like, find people that you can do that with.
Yeah.
And I think another, like, reminder for maybe people who aren't in a place where they're super overwhelmed, for moms that are in a season where they're not super overwhelmed, is to start, like, tuning your ears to hear those confessions from other moms, and be a place where another mom can feel like they can be really honest and vulnerable and leave at rest. And, as we're going to, I think, agree, hopefully that's like they're leaving with absolution if they're a Christian and they're asking for that. But it might also just mean, like, you're the person that is there to listen to them, and not offer any advice. Like, you're just going to listen, which is really hard to do. Obviously, I love to give advice on humidifiers and
I would love to hear it all. I'm glad you have it down to a 3-point system. That's what I'm.
Easy to clean, guys. You got to get one easy to clean. Okay.
You can add that in the notes, how to buy a humidifier.
I'm going to link it. I'll link that, and maybe I'll get, like, some points for it or something. Is
there
that
you
how
go.
influencers work? Yeah. Or money, not points.
Amazon affiliate.
Yeah. I'm not going to do that.
You hit it on the head, Kelsi, when you said, how are they leaving us? Are they leaving us in rest, or are they leaving us in grief and burden? And, there's also not a perfect formula for this dang social media that both of us are on and spend some time on, as far as what you share. And the only question that I've come up with myself, and it's not perfect, it doesn't always work, but before I post something, I say, how is this serving the person it's going to see? Because if it's not going to serve that person, then I don't need to post it. So
yeah, I think that's very helpful. I would say, I'm shifting gears a little bit here, but I would say a lot of angst and a lot of my personal angst as a Christian mom comes from not just the thought, like the recurring thought, like, is my kid happy? Are they okay? But is my kid going to be a Christian someday? Like, I think that's, if I'm really honest, that's like a weekly, if not daily thought for me. I also know I'm in theology space. So, like, if you don't have that thought every day, you're fine. You're better off.
That's not weird to not have that fear, and it's not weird to have that fear.
Exactly. Yeah. If you don't have that fear, great. I don't want to give you that fear. But I do think a lot of moms have that fear. And I really loved Melina's devotional on this. There's probably other ones throughout the book that talk specifically about like answering that
Yep.
question. But I was curious what your own experience has been with that fear and answering that question, or just wrestling with that question as a mom.
Yeah. I think I've been there where I've thought, oh my gosh, my little public school kids, they're never going to be Christians when they're adults. um, but and Melina does such a good job. She doesn't even hesitate. She goes right to the promises we have from Christ. Now, as a Lutheran, I obviously go to their baptisms and say, I can
Yeah.
look to that. But Melina also says, she said, the God who pursues me is also the God that pursues my kids.
Yeah.
And that is a huge, huge comfort to me, because I have not lived exactly as my mother and father have wanted me to live. And I think I hear in my personal experience, I hear older moms too coming to retreats and saying, man, my kid is not voting the same as me. Are they safe? And it doesn't come out that way, but sometimes we look to the fruit instead of to the Savior, right? We can't determine if our kids are saved by the fruit. And I think we can personally, I can get really paranoid about my youngest, who is obsessed with dinosaurs. And I think, if he's reading all these books about millions and millions of years, is he ever going to believe in creation? And is that going to erode his faith forever and ever? But then I get these fantastic glimpses where he's telling his buddies about Jesus.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think we can't look for the fruit. We have to look to our Savior.
Which also means we can't always, this is a struggle for me. Those glimpses of like, okay, they're telling their friends about Jesus, or like for me, my 4-year-old, one day we were having a talk, and he, first of all, he called me out, and then he said, because I was saying, let me just tell the whole story. I was saying, Otto, you need to be nice to your brother. You cannot yell at him. And he said, well, you yell at me. And yeah. And I kind of tried to push it off for a minute. And then I was like, you're right. I do yell at you, and I shouldn't do that. And I need your forgiveness when I do that. And I'm going to probably cry when I tell the story. And then I said, no one is perfect. I said, we're not perfect. And so we need to forgive each other. And he said, yeah, but Jesus is perfect. And I said, that's right. And then he said, and we're sinners. And then I just started bawling in front of him. And then he looked at me and started playing with a truck or something. But all that to say, those are beautiful moments that I think are a gift from God. But we also don't want to necessarily just rely on those.
No.
Because that is, in a way, the fruit of obedience or knowledge in the faith or whatever. So I think what you're saying is like remembering our children are baptized, knowing that we are going to church, on a consistent basis, and they're hearing God's word, which we know creates faith, and then like praying for them constantly. Like those are the things that we have and can rely on. And those moments of goodness or like reassurance, I think we don't need to like push them away. I think we can be thankful for them, but also knowing like there's never going to be enough of those stacked up on top of each other to make us assured in our kids' salvation, just like there's never going to be enough for ourselves that are going to make us assured of our salvation. So yeah,
for sure. And that example, Kelsi, too, I think is an important point for us to maybe bring up, is asking our kids to forgive us when we do screw up.
Yeah.
and communicating to them that, mom is a sinner too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that is a huge relationship builder, even to say, mom, because I am blown away sometimes by my kids think I'm perfect or the devil. there's no happy medium, right? So
Yeah.
I think having those honest conversations and coming to them and saying, man, I screwed up. Like, I lost it on you because you didn't we weren't able to get out the door on time, and that is not okay, and I'm sorry, and I need your forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And that confession, absolution, is gonna look different in different families, and that's okay too.
Mm.
I think sometimes we get really hung up on forcing the "I forgive you, you're forgiven" phrases, and that's not necessarily how it's going to look in their lives. A friend of mine, I think this made it in. This is horrible. I think this is in the devotion, or I wrote it for somewhere. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But they were on vacation, and we went and met their family and had supper together. And this friend of mine from school came up, and the kid sat on his lap, and he was complaining because a brother had done something, right? And that's inevitable. There was like 10 kids there under 12 or something. So he comes up, and I thought, man, I'm just glad it's not my kid beating up on his kid. and I remember my friend just saying, well, I think what we need to do is go tell your brother he's forgiven. So he sat there and he listened to his son. He didn't say, oh, come on, just get over it. That's my tendency. Just get over it. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
He listened and validated that hurt
Mm.
and said, go tell your brother he's forgiven.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're right. Like, our kids are not gonna, because I've definitely found myself a few times being like, say you're sorry. And then
we all do that.
Say you forgive them. And I think and it's fine because they are learning, like, that's important.
Yes.
Even if they don't want to do it, but
now hug each other.
Just yeah, exactly. Just the cyclical, like, repetition of this is a part of our family, and this happens, and it happens between siblings, it happens between moms and children, it happens between moms and dads. Like, that's really good for them to see too. And then it happens, I think this is another thing I wanted to ask you about, like, because you wrote about how important forgiveness has been for you as a mom, not necessarily from your children, but from God. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that gets us to, I think, the central point of what is so hard about motherhood, and maybe even Christian motherhood, is so quickly, rather than being rooted in Christ's forgiveness and what that means for us, we feel ashamed and like we don't deserve forgiveness, or it's not for us specifically in that vocation. So can you talk a little bit about how that's been important for you as a mom?
Yeah, for sure. So this is a story I tell, and I say, I don't know how to talk about it because I don't want to make too big a deal out of it, but it's a big deal. When with my first, I got pregnant via a one-night stand. That's all the information you probably need to know there. And when my oldest was 6 months old, I met my husband and we got married, like, within a year. But in premarital counseling, I remember I was giving all these ways I was going to do everything right to redeem what I had done, right? To redeem how I had come into motherhood. So they were ridiculous things like, oh yeah, obviously I'm going to stay at home all the time with the kids. And obviously I'm going to always have supper. And obviously we're never going to go into debt. Well, I've done all of those things wrong, and a myriad of other things. So I vividly remember my childhood pastor looking at me and saying, Katie, you do know you're forgiven. And if you don't, let me tell you right now, you are forgiven. And that changed how I viewed my work as a mom. In that moment, it did not. It did not.
Yeah.
But it's something that I look back on frequently. And being rooted in that forgiveness has been epically wonderful and hard, but there's always been that hope there.
Yeah.
So, and I should preface it with, like, I grew up going to parochial school, a Lutheran school, K-8. Like, I did knocking on the door evangelism. I was not going to be the one who, I went to a 4-year, I graduated from a Lutheran college. Like, I was not going to be that girl.
Yeah.
But I was. So it was like an identity thing for me. And that forgiveness piece was, and still is, huge. Now, do I often forget that? Yeah. And I think I forget it the most when I'm doing a pretty good job.
Yeah.
Like writing the
Absolutely.
motherhood devotional. That's the biggest fear with this. What if my kids are axe murderers? And that's what drove me as I was writing it. People are probably not going to buy this when they hear this now, but I just thought, I cannot give any inclination that I know what I'm doing. For one, it's a lie. And for two, if my kids end up axe murderers, then this book is obsolete. So that's really the underpinning of the gospel.
My gosh.
My kids aren't old enough for me to say, and I haven't raised every human being, right? So I can't give how-tos, but I can give encouragement that's rooted in what Christ has done for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Christ's forgiveness is so hard to put our identity in, even though our identity is in that as Christians, whether we like it or not. Like, we don't have to think about it enough for it to be there. It is there. No. But there is this disconnect between knowing that and the reality of it, which we would like to fix. Like, ideally, we would want to fix that. It's hard to do that because I think we want our identity to be in what we do. And there's not, and I was thinking about this too, like, there is a level of, and I think this was where, like, vocation comes in and horizontal righteousness. Like, there is a level of purpose and goodness you get from your work as a mother. And that's kind of also, like, to your point of harping on how terrible we are, why that's not encouraging, because there's goodness to motherhood. That's so amazing. And realizing, like, the things that you thought you were incapable of doing and you're able to do is, like, really amazing. But remembering that isn't what defines you, and that's not what makes you valuable ultimately. Like, that is not where your value is really, really difficult to do.
Yeah, I think for me, realizing that there's freedom even in motherhood because of the gospel.
Yeah.
Is such an important thing.
And do you think that kind of gets us to what we were talking about at the beginning of, like, there's freedom to mess up and there's freedom to do it in different ways?
For sure. Yeah. And just freedom. And there's freedom to change and to grow.
Yeah.
And to try things. And there's freedom to work at it.
Yeah.
So I think people get scared sometimes because they think freedom means everybody's going to lay down and just become lazy bums. But that's not actually what happens. Instead, in that freedom, God uses us in amazing ways, beautiful ways, broken ways, because of our brokenness, right? But there's still beauty there.
Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about the joy where you found joy as a mom. because you are one of the most joyful people I think I know. And I know that you've written at least one devotional in there as well about that joy and where you found that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's kind of the end caps of the devotional is about joy. And that just happened, I think, because I was speaking on joy in California. And here we still stand. So, but anyways, I think maybe the best way for me to start talking about this is a story with my dear, dear daughter. And she one time, well, it's happened more than once, but this particular story is the pinnacle of it. She said, looked at me after I had screwed up and we didn't get out the door on time and we weren't going to get to do the things that I thought we were going to do. She looked me dead in the eye and she said, when I'm a mom, we're going to get up. I'm going to say, what do you want to do? And we're going to do that thing. And I looked her dead in the eye and I said, wonderful. I hope they say, let's go to Grandma Katie's. So I assumed that my joy would come from doing all the things and being all the things. But that is not where it comes from, because even when I get all the things done, then I don't have the humility gets removed sometimes. Like I always joke with people and say, yeah, I got pregnant because if I would have done everything right, nobody would want to be around me. I would be just this arrogant little I'm not even going to say the word. There's a lot of words I could use, but those moments when we assume this is where joy will come from, but really joy comes from what Christ does in and through us. And I think we see it and we go, oh, I survived that. And joy comes from that too. So ultimately, C.S. Lewis has this quote that I used for Here We Still Stand about pleasure is often in our grasp and within reach, but joy is not. And joy is so closely related to grief. And I think part of the reason for that is that it's because we're grieving all of our limitations. And we know the brokenness is there, but we still have joy because of the work of Christ. So
I haven't really thought about it that way. Joy comes from, in our limitation, the fact that Christ is still there and clings to us.
Yeah.
That's really pretty and beautiful thought. Very important for moms, I think.
For sure. Because think about a day in the life of a mother, regardless of what age and stage your kids are in. It's a roller coaster if you're looking at your own work or how happy your own kids are.
Yeah.
You know, I am horrible at riding my kids' emotions. My husband does it, whatever, you know, like he loves them dearly, cares for them, but he's not riding the emotional roller coaster like I am.
Yeah.
And I wish I could be more like him. But when I can pull myself out of that and say, oh yeah, how I am as a mother is not determined by if my kids are happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they're gonna go through hard things and they're gonna be unhappy.
Right. Yeah. So. Yeah. That's such a talk about freedom like that. Even though I'm just in the beginning stages, when you can separate yourself from how they are doing or feeling emotionally or their mistakes, like what how much they climbed on the communion rail this week at church.
Yeah. So I have a great story for that. Is it okay?
Tell me, please.
Okay.
Please tell me.
So I got a phone call one day from school from our athletic director, who we know well. My daughter is friends with his daughter. Great family. We love them. And I answered the phone and I was like, hey, what's going on? Well, there was an incident with one of your kids. I was like, what did my boys do? Nope. Not the boys. Not the boys. It was in the bathroom, and I was like, oh my gosh, my poor little girl has been sexually assaulted. Nope. She wreaked havoc in the locker room at a fairly young age when her father was coaching wrestling. And in that moment, like, I just started bawling because I thought, who am I that I get a call from the school? My daughter, who is I think she was in the 4th grade then, 3rd grade maybe. I'm raising an axe murderer, obviously, because that's who does things like this. But then I called a older mom friend of mine, and this was one of those times where it was good for me to be put in check. And she said, "This is nothing. Come on now, get over it." Right?
Yeah.
But she could say that to me because our relationship is rooted in the gospel. So she's a pastor's wife and has been near and dear to us for years. But just putting that in perspective, and that's a time when that another mother coming in to speak to that was hugely
really helpful.
beneficial. Like, this is not your identity as a mom. And in the grand scheme of things, was that a poor decision of my child? Oh, yes. Yes, it was.
Yeah.
But that does not identify her or me. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And we can give our kids real life consequences.
Oh, she got consequences.
Right. Exactly. Knowing that we're able to give them consequences without this extra anxiety and concern that whatever they did wrong changes their status before God. Because that's when I think that anxiety I have a lot in parenting of like, well, if they act this way, then this means this about their relationship with God or whatever.
Or honestly, for me, it came back from like this arrogance, like, oh, this feels bad. And that's not, that's awful.
Yeah.
So, but I will say our punishment kind of backlashed on us because she had stuff she had to do at home. And then I talked to the school too. Well, me and my husband did, and said, what can she do at school that's like appropriate? And they said, well, she can like help the janitorial staff at the elementary school because that's where she went to school. Well, she loved it. It was not a punishment. She loved it. So
she found a new passion.
Yep, it just goes to say that even appropriately punishing your child might not have the impact that you thought it was going to. You just don't know how stuff is going to pan out.
Hey, it opened a new door for her. So
it did. She has aspirations now.
That's amazing. Well, I know you guys, maybe we're probably just reiterating a lot of what we've said, but I'm interested because I know with Freely Given, your podcast with Gretchen, a lot of your audience probably are moms. I know you hear from a lot of people, and I know you guys talk a lot about freedom in Christ for mothers. What would you say are some of the like top things that you hear as burdens for moms? Or even like maybe it's that, or maybe it's like the thing that you've heard from people that has been the most freeing for them in whatever you guys have discussed over the years.
That's a super good question. I think it comes down to letting people have a place where they're free to talk about their limitations. Allowing women a space where they can explore their limitations, right? Talk about them freely and not get judged is and then offering an absolution. And it's not that we don't say that's a bad idea, I wouldn't do that. But we don't, because that's not what we're called to as Christians either. There is
Right.
a space in between not acknowledging it and condemn, right? That is where we're supposed to live.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well, yeah. I mean, the law is meant for our good in
Mhm.
our life is with our neighbor.
Mhm.
Because if we don't, we don't follow it, all hell will break loose. Like
Yeah,
that's
literally.
the reality.
Yeah.
So
But
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
I think it gives us the ability, because we don't have to get so worked up when we do see a friend like screwing up, because we
Mhm.
know that's not who God created them to be, right? So we can still offer them love and empathy and all of those good things, and say, yeah, that was broken. That was a bad move. But you're forgiven. I love
Yeah.
you. Christ loves you.
Yeah.
So now
Yeah.
that is a very simplistic way that it came out of my mouth, but there's a difference between recognizing brokenness and condemning someone.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, well, and I think it seems like we keep going back to is the fact that like in the vocation of mother, in the vocation of parent, that you're already at that place of condemnation
Yeah.
most of the time. Like, yes, that might not always be the case. And like, if sure, we can use our judgment in that or pray that the Holy Spirit uses the law as
Mm-hmm.
it's meant to be used. But like most of the time, people are, when they're in a place of being vulnerable or ready to like confess, it's
Yeah.
because they're already there. Like they don't need more law piled on top of
Yeah.
them.
Or they're
They
like
are
me in
primed
my,
for the gospel.
yeah,
Go
or they're
ahead.
like me in my pastor's office, like being
Yes.
militant about all the things I'm gonna do.
Yeah.
And I think I frequently think about what Jim Nestigan used to say about tuning our ears to hear a confession.
Mm-hmm.
And um it doesn't sound like, friend, I have sinned.
Right.
It sounds like I'm hurting, I screwed up,
Yeah.
XYZ.
I'm
So
overwhelmed.
I'm overwhelmed. Yep.
Yeah, there was I think this is important to talk about because it is hard to kind of suss out like, well, what does this circumstance look like for just what like for women
Mhm.
or for people who aren't in church leadership, because this is the like, most of the time this is the job and role of pastors, but we also are called to do this as the priesthood of all
Mhm.
believers.
Mhm.
Um and so anyway, I think maybe this story is hopefully helpful. One day, this was after my second son was born, and he was a little bit older. He was probably as far as babies go, he was maybe like 6 or 7 months old. And my husband was out of town. I dropped my older son off at daycare, went to get coffee because I think I had some time in the morning. Anyway, I go to our favorite coffee shop, and there's like this area in the back where it's kind of open. There's like benches. So I sat down and I was drinking my coffee, but there was another mom I didn't know sitting near me, and she had a newborn baby girl. And we kind of started talking, and I found out she had two older boys and her husband was out of town. So we were talking about that. And then pretty quickly, like I think she was probably in that place we all know postpartum, like hormonally, she was just overwhelmed.
Wrecked.
It was, yeah, she was in that place. Like it
Yeah.
wasn't just who she was. It was clearly however old her daughter was, that was what was going on. But I mean, she just needed to talk to someone. And she was like pretty quickly telling me how overwhelmed she was. She was about to go back to work from maternity leave. She was like, I think at one point she was like, I don't feel like I'm giving my sons any time. I mean, that is a confession. Like
Yeah.
that is someone who's looking for some bit of hope, feeling like they are just failing. And
Mhm.
I don't know what I said. I have no idea. Hopefully the Holy Spirit took over in that moment. But I think it's just a good reminder of like, when you're hearing that stuff pouring out of someone, like, be ready to listen. You're not going to do it perfect. You're going to fail at it a million times. That's okay. But that's what we're talking about when we talk about like tuning our ears to hear confessions as Christians and lay people in a world where nowadays there's nowhere to go with those confessions.
No, exactly. You can't reveal hardly anything. They'll eat you up alive.
Yeah.
And that's
whether you're a Christian or not.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yep. There's not safe places for people to reveal their brokenness. And that doesn't make brokenness go away. I think it makes it fester and go deeper. And I hate categorizing things, but worse, right?
Yeah.
It festers, and it's festering things are not good. You want to get that out.
Moms know that.
Yep. Yes. Mastitis is not a good thing.
Yeah.
So
all of that. Well, if you had to leave people with one thing that you hope they get from the devotional, what would it be? I'm sure it's something we've already said, but what do you hope that moms take away when they read this collection of devotionals?
Yeah. I hope that they can see and hold in the same place, whether it's by themselves or with a group of mom, the hard and the joy, and see the hope in all of it.
That's great.
So,
well, Encouragement for Motherhood is out now. So
Yeah.
I'll link it in the show notes, and I hope
order a bunch of copies for all your friends.
All your friends, just in time for Mother's Day.
Yep, perfect.
Thanks so much, Katie. So good to see you.
Thanks, Kelsi.
Outside Ourselves is a 1517 podcast. To learn more about all of our podcasts and all of our shows, please go to 1517.org/podcasts. And feel free to poke around the site if you haven't been there before. We have a ton of resources, daily articles, and daily podcasts, more than one. And we also have a really amazing search engine. If you are looking for something in particular or something on a specific passage, you should be able to type that in to our search bar and find resources quickly. I'll be back here in a couple weeks with our next guest.